Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
And we are bringing you another action-packed episode this week, heavy on the Minnesota topics. We are going to start with Uber and Lyft debacle in Minneapolis and are pleased to welcome Representative Elliott Engen back to the podcast to help us break it down. We will discuss the policy that led to Uber and Lyft leaving Minneapolis in a month or two and where we go from here. Next, we will continue on our Minnesota conversation by discussing Governor Walz's recent statements on abortion and how that topic may play through November. We will get into recent BPOU conventions and break down the troubling background of one candidate who recently lost the endorsement, but with whom Michael has some history. Then we will go national and break down former President Donald Trump's comments about a, quote, bloodbath. And then we're going to end this episode with a possibly one-time segment called Did Michael Break the Law? Thank you for joining us and enjoy the show. We are excited to be joined again by Representative Elliott Engen. Representative, if you want to just maybe start by helping us break down kind of how we came to be. What was the ordinance that passed in Minneapolis, and how did we get to where we are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first off, thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it. And just to let you guys know, you're the talk of the Capitol. Everybody's talking about your show, and they love it. So,
hey.
Appreciate you guys for all you do. But we have to actually go back to last year's session to start out this conversation. The first veto of Governor Tim Walz's career came in the form of an Uber-Lyft bill that looked very similar to the Minneapolis City Council ordinance that passed last week. Ostensibly, that same bill that he vetoed would have taken Uber and Lyft and forced them out of the state because it would have applied even broader than just Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis. Fast forward to last week, and Minneapolis overrides Governor or Mayor Fry's veto of this ordinance. And it's completely unworkable because it's 60% over what the TCA agreement had shown they should be increasing the rates of drivers to. It's really forcing the city to adopt unworkable policy for a private enterprise. And we know anytime that happens, it's just not going to be good for business. You're going to be manipulating a market to a point of no return. So Uber and Lyft comes out and says, nope, we can't work with this. We're going to be leaving the city of Minneapolis. The city council doesn't care. They override that veto, like I said. And now we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place where we want Uber and Lyft to stay here in Minnesota and in the 7-county metro area, but we don't know how to get there because Democrats really are sticking to their guns and saying that they want to support the increase to driver pay. But if you take a look at what they're currently making, it's $54 an hour on average. So this is a big issue that a lot of people care about, from young people to senior citizens who are using these services to get to and from a doctor's appointments. Huge issue, and glad to dive on it with you guys.
Now, before I get into some of the proposed fixes, your bill included, I do want to kind of hit on that because I think it's important to note that yes, there is the wage and salary issue for the drivers.
Yeah.
So with Uber and Lyft pulling out, Uber claims that 10,000 drivers are now without a job. And so this is a lot of times some full-time job drivers, some people, it's the gig economy, right? A
Right.
side hustle, do it for a couple hours on the weekends. I have a friend that does that exact same thing, father of 3, and, works for 6 hours to just have some extra fun money for their family. So I think it is something that is a really important thing on that side. But one thing that you hit on was the use that some of the counties in the 7-county metro use, how they use it for, example, there's not enough metro mobility, right? And so there's different organizations that partner with Uber or Lyft to provide their services. And I did see in a newsletter from Dakota County Commissioner Atkins, he wrote that Dakota County uses Lyft to help persons with disabilities get to jobs and doctor's appointments. Uber and Lyft leaving the Twin Cities due to what's going on in Minneapolis hurts more than just the folks going to the airport or the bar. It harms our most vulnerable. And that was something that I didn't know much about. And I think there are a lot more of these kind of unintended consequences that are really going to be a big factor here.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if you take a look at my email inbox right now, it is filled with different communities that I really didn't even know that this would impact as much as it is. That's from folks in the disabled community who are using this to get to and from a job or a day provider. If they're using it to get to and from work, obviously the ramifications when it comes to going out to a bar and getting home responsibly. Senior citizens who are going to that doctor's appointment, like I noted earlier, or going to refill a prescription. And I know that Uber and Lyft actually currently, like you said, does work with counties on fulfilling some Medicaid and Medicare stuff. So this is a huge deal. This touches a lot of people, 35,000 Minnesotans weekly just in the 7 county metro area. So that's not a small number. And to have such a heavy handed and short sighted ordinance that's going to be taking this away for so many, that's why we did this bill. That's why we're preempting. It's because this is local control out of control. If this was just impacting Minneapolis, that'd be one thing, but this is bigger than that because they're forcing the hand of Uber and Lyft when it comes to everywhere else, too.
I want to talk about your bill for a second. Before we get there, I want to get your perspective on what do you think is going on in Minneapolis in terms of the viewpoint of some of the council members who are pushing some of this legislation that really just doesn't have an impact on the city of Minneapolis, but it has a ripple effect across the rest of the state.
So there's a difference between feel good policy and do good policy. And this is feel good policy with the exact opposite of do good results. This is going to have horrible impacts on everybody. They know that. In fact, I know that there were Democrat legislators up here at the Capitol that were calling Minneapolis City Council members and urging them to not override Mayor Fry's veto. But they did it anyways because they need to prove that progressive bastion that is the Minneapolis City Council right now. There's no room for going backwards because in their eyes, that's the opposite of progress. But if progress is taking away this service for so many, that's not the same definition that I grew up knowing. So we need to take a look at this and hopefully rational voices can come together, sit around the table and figure out a way to keep these services here. But even from Governor Walz's words, I'm not sure that's on the table anymore.
Let's talk a bit about what your bill does and how there is a potential for a legislative fix to address this issue.
Yeah, so the bill is pretty simple. It's 4 lines long. It just says that no local unit of government can add or impose any additional restrictions or regulations on a transportation service provider. So Uber and Lyft. This is, I mean, it's a simple fix. It's definitely kind of takes a sledgehammer approach to it. Just says let's nip this in the bud. Let's keep those conversations ongoing. If we want to talk about raising rates for the drivers, we can of course do that, but that requires two parties to be at the table negotiating in good faith at the same time, face to face. One of them is saying we can't do this. We have to get up and leave because the other one is not having a good faith argument at the get go. This would just simply kind of keep things at bay, and hopefully we can figure it out in the meantime.
Your bill would then allow for there to be a labor discussion about some of the wages and that would onboard some of that discussion and provide a little bit of, for lack of a better phrase, safe harbor for these companies to still operate here, for there to be some services that they provide, as Becky has discussed, and you've discussed too, just the services that Uber provides other than people going to the airport and going to the bars, that there is a valid and significant public service that both these companies provide.
Oh,
And your bill would allow that to continue, but yet a discussion further on some of the pay concerns that some of the drivers and other people have, correct?
yes, 100%. We want those conversations to be ongoing, but they can't happen if both parties aren't at that table, like I said. And, overall, we do have to recognize that there's a different political side to all of this. There are some who have a vested interest in having Uber and Lyft leave. Without recognizing that, we're not seeing the full picture. I know that in the year, I believe, of 2017, there were over 2,800 licensed taxi vehicles in Minneapolis, and I believe it's somewhere around 300 and some today. So there are people who have a vested interest in having Uber and Lyft leave for their own benefit. But is that a benefit or a net good for the consumer, for those riders, for the drivers who have an opportunity to, Becky, like you said, pick up that second or third job to pay the bills and make some extra money? In the gig economy, this is really a form of self actualization. You can go and make some extra money on the side if you want to, and you know what you're agreeing to. And if you didn't like it, you don't have to participate in that job. But people are telling me every single day that they want that job there, and they're scared that it's going to be gone as of May 1st. So Yeah, it's definitely a catch-22.
Now, I saw when I was reading some articles about this as it was ongoing, and then maybe it's the same study you mentioned earlier, but Governor Walz had commissioned a state report that determined that pay wages should be in the Twin Cities to align with minimum wage after paying for vehicle expenses and payroll taxes. So that was an increase. It was an increase of 89 cents per mile and 48 cents per minute, significantly less than Minneapolis proposed. Um, is that part of the conversation here when you're trying to factor in what pay would look like, or is that just kind of all the tools in the toolkit are on the table is what the goal is here?
Yeah, I think all the tools being in the toolkit is the goal. Like I said, this is 60% higher than what that task force had come back with when it came for recommendations on pay scale. Like when a driver is going to pick up a passenger, for example, they don't currently have a passenger in the vehicle. They're making $34 an hour on average. When they're waiting for a passenger to request a ride, they're making around $24 an hour. When they have a passenger in their vehicle, it's at $54 an hour. So to say that these rideshare providers aren't already already providing a wage that's respectful or reasonable, I think that falls flat on the face of it. But if they want to have those discussions about increasing rates, again, they can't do that when Minneapolis is simply saying, no, you must pay something that we know isn't tenable for the company, for the consumer. People are not going to take those rides. If they see a four block commute being $60, that's not tenable either. So it really is just a mess, guys. And I wish that I could um, provide some, if I could linguistically make that any easier to understand. I wish I could, but it's just not there. All sides on this are just kind of going sideways. And that's why we just said, okay, let's do a preemption. We have a solution to keep people at the table and fix this thing. But they have to be at the table. And right now they're not.
Where is so Minneapolis passed this. Is there any information that St. Paul's going to pass it too?
I've heard rumblings. That's something that they're gonna be looking at. If that's
But
the
the
case, then that's nail in the coffin right there.
but the practical effect of it leaving Minneapolis is May 1st is that leaving Minneapolis that both these companies are going to leave and it's a ripple effect. So it
Yep.
would only be for lack of I don't know the opposite of icing on the cake, but it would only put as you said further nail in the coffin. I guess is
Yeah.
the phrase. What happened is if St. Paul passed this too.
What happens if you're requesting a ride from Ramsey County to Hennepin County or from St. Paul to Minneapolis? We're just not gonna we're not gonna provide that ride. I mean, that's untenable, and a lot of people do that. So, like you said, ripple effects. There's no such thing as good and bad policy. There's only trade-offs, and the Minneapolis City Council failed to look at trade-offs on every side of this. And here we are trying to clean up after the mess. I think that there are reasonable Democrats that recognize they have a problem here too, but they don't want to be the first one to come out and say, "Hey, maybe we should rethink this," because it's going to create a faction within their own side. The one left hand doesn't know what the far left hand is doing, and we're stuck here just saying, "Hey, guys, listen to us. You should bring us into the fold so we can help fix this." But that's the last thing that Walz wants right now.
And again, the ordinance passed 10-3, and then the Mayor Fry vetoed it, but then the council overrode his veto. And
Yep.
so we're left here now with a situation with Uber and Lyft leaving by May 1st and a number of concerns about what's going to happen long term. Talk a little bit about discussions you've had, a degree which you feel comfortable discussing them with
Yeah.
Democrats who are concerned about this, because this is a real common sense solution. Have you had any outreach from Democrats about possibilities of there being a bipartisan support for your legislative fix?
I intentionally did not even sign my name to the bill in the number one spot, the chief author spot. I left that blank. If a Democrat wanted to take that, it was theirs for the taking. I did not have one reach out. I talked to several members of the DFL caucus on the floor in the House, and it seemed like something that they didn't want to touch. And that's not leading. That's not governing. I wish that we could have those conversations and find a way to make this a bipartisan solution, but there doesn't seem to be much appetite right now for that.
If your legislative fix does not become part of the solution, Uber and Lyft leave, what's the transportation, kind of the non taxi transportation services in Minnesota that exist? And are there other alternatives being discussed to address this problem other than just your legislation or coming up with a circumstance by which the demands that have been asked by the city council are met?
I've heard some real wacky proposals coming out of the Senate where they're looking at a potential state-run rideshare provider. That to me,
Isn't
that
that
throws
Metro Transit? We
exactly. How's that
we
working out?
yes.
Not so hot. You're having to remind people not to defecate or assault people on the light rail right now, and we don't know how in the heck that's going to work when it comes to a rideshare provider. It's all over the map, and I'm sorry to to have the government swoop in and fix a problem that the government created in the first place is just backwards thinking. But again, is it about finding good policy or is it about making factions happy? There's some senators that are pushing this proposal that I believe they're doing it for their own electoral sake, for keeping their contingencies happy, but not actually proposing legislation that's serious on the face of it or going to improve the lives of any Minnesotan who needs a rideshare service to get to and from.
I discuss a minute because this has happened in other states. Uber has left other cities, left Austin. Describe the aftermath of what happened and how that issue was resolved at all.
It was very similar to what we're seeing right now, and they did leave, and they were asked to come back to the table after a preemption was passed. They needed to take a second look, and cooler heads prevailed, but it took some time, but they were without those services. I know that Seattle was in a similar situation. They never ended up leaving. I think some negotiations took place behind doors, and they were able to figure it out. But we really don't think that's happening in this situation. If it is, Governor Walz sure did a good job of indicating otherwise. When he's urging folks to call their city council members and urge them to think differently on this, that shows that he's kind of out of options here. And that's what I saw as of yesterday at his press conference.
Have you what's the next step here? Have there been conversations? Do you expect, other than being hopefully optimistic here, is your bill gonna get a hearing?
I don't believe it will get a hearing. No, this is our approach to this. So we want to have a public listening session where we bring in drivers, we bring in folks from the disability community, we bring in young people, we bring in a very diverse coalition of folks who either work in rideshare or use it often. We want to listen to them. We think that they're going to have a solution more so than any legislator or individual legislator would. And then that'll kind of inform what the next steps are. We'll probably have a press conference based off of the findings of what they're doing and what they're telling us. And then we're also going to be looking at, within our own caucus, a study. We'd like to bring in some legislators to really take a deep dive as to how the rate structure works currently. I know that there was one that just recently came out in that TCA, but there's more work that we can do to really show people that we're on the right side of this and that we're using our brains and not just our hearts on this one, because that seems to be where the issue is stemming from in the first place.
Do you think that it's more so you think your bill won't get a hearing, that's your perspective, your bill won't get a hearing, and so if there is a legislative solution that's pushed by Democrats on this issue, you think it is a state app that there's a government solution that the Democrats propose to deal with this issue? Is that where your thinking is right now?
That was one of the ideas that was floated. And how serious it is, I really don't know, even though we can joke about the seriousness regardless. One of the other potential avenues that could be happening right now is, again, those closed door conversations with members of SEIU and folks who are in the taxi driver business, and as well as rideshare companies and the city council itself. None of that has been indicated to me, but that really is the only other option here. So the way that I see it is either have a solution that involves Republicans, which, as I stated earlier, there doesn't seem to be any appetite for, or that behind closed door solution. And that doesn't seem to be happening here. Void of those two choices, Uber and Lyft are gone. And if I were a betting man, which I'm not, but Pat Garofalo is, he says that
Yes.
yeah, he says that he's betting on them being gone.
That's a disappointing development.
I
I
know.
was hoping for some more optimism tonight, but that's a pretty stark future you're portraying, unfortunately, it's probably accurate. We want to thank you for joining us tonight and discussing your legislation. Where can people follow you to follow your updates and follow this legislation?
Yeah, take a look on Twitter. I know we actually just put out a press release on it. If people want to subscribe to the newsletter, we do that weekly. We want to give folks updates on this. I've had more people under the age of 25 reach out on this issue in the past couple of days than I have on really any other issue. This is really igniting some folks to say, hey, local units of government matter, and who we vote for, that matters. So I just take a look at any of the socials. It's just Elliott Engen, MN, but always appreciate a call, always appreciate an email. Trying to serve you guys better. So let me know where you guys stand on this. But
Representative Engen, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about your legislation. Always fun to talk to you, all right, sir?
always great to be on. Thank you so much, you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Becky, we just spoke with Representative Elliott Engen on the Uber-Lyft controversy that's going on. I did expect there to be more positive news, but your take on the discussion.
Yeah, it's hard to be positive with single party control up at the Capitol and being Republicans pulling this bill forward. I want to applaud him and other sponsors of this bill trying to fix, as the Constitution or, conservative, constitutional, small government Republican, I do tend to like grassroots, smaller, city led initiatives, state led over federal, that sort of angle. But there is a time and place where preemptions need to be enacted. This is a really big issue, and I think it's very short sighted. I don't think that the city council members were really looking at the whole scope of the picture when they made this decision. The amount of jobs lost, that's real dollars out of the pockets of a lot of 10,000 drivers just from Uber that they said, that's real impact, especially, just I'm sure everybody else is getting it. Our property taxes are going up, in addition to gas prices going up and grocery bills going up. And so these kind of, like I said, the gig economy, these things are really important for some families. And to lose that extra income, even if it's 50, $100 a week, is impactful. And the one thing that we didn't even talk about with Representative Engen that I am nervous for and curious if there are any studies in some of the other cities where this did happen and Uber or Lyft pulled out. But this is something, this is a resource for a lot of people so they don't get behind the wheel after having cocktails. This is
Correct.
something my husband and I just went on a date night. My mom came over and watched the baby, and we called an Uber not because we're gonna go out and, start taking shots all night, but because we wanted to have maybe more than 2 drinks while we're out on our date night, and it's a resource that we use, leaving our cars parked at our house, to be able to do. I think that there are a lot of people that might now fudge that line a little bit of, the buzz driving is still drunk driving, and even beyond that, and I'm really anxious and nervous about the implications that may come from that without these resources available for folks that use them coming home from bars or home from a party or whatever it might be. So time will tell, but yeah, I mean, it's a bleak little situation we're faced with.
Correct. I mean, when I first heard the news, and it's always been part of the discussion, I was concerned about the drinking and driving aspect. As I've disclosed many times, pleaded guilty to drinking and driving in 2013. I've been a volunteer for the last 11 years on the issue. And so issues of drinking and driving and safe roads are very concerning for me. I have children that just started to drive. And so the idea of there not being that level, that additional opportunity for people to take a sober cab is concerning. I understand the practical reality. I also understand the reality that there shouldn't be people drinking and driving. But the truth of the matter is that one of the opportunities that has existed because of the advancement of uh, Lyft and Uber is the ability for people to order just in the situation that you did, even if it's not intoxicated driving like it was for me, but just wanting to go out and have a drink or two and just want to just have that freedom. If I was going out in the town, which I don't do, I would, for a variety of reasons, I would want to probably take an Uber or Lyft just for the convenience factor and all things. But then when you tack in, the social aspect, which a lot of people do, been a big impact that Uber and Lyft have had in making our roads more safe by being an available service for people, just like you described. And for a variety of people, whether they're drinking, whether they're drunk like I was, or they are just, going out and having a couple drinks, and they just want to make sure there's a little bit of safety. It really has a big impact. And so it does concern me. I also will share, I was surprised and I did not know the level that counties and others used the services to help people and the other legitimate kind of public service role that Uber and Lyft played. And so it does have a dramatic ripple effect. I've discussed this with a lot of people, and I also think the damage it's going to cause is if Uber and Lyft are not here, it's going to hurt long term the Twin Cities growth and development, because it's just another example of problems that are here. There's a lot of good things going on in the state from that. I understand that. And there's things that we should change and refocus, but this is not a long-term success strategy for Minnesota to grow and prosper. And it's short-sightedness on the part of the Minneapolis City Council. And I think it's going to have a lot of ripple effects. I do think it's going to be a good election year issue for Republicans to be talking about that this is because Minneapolis is all Democrats. And although there were 3 members of the city council that didn't vote for this resolution, that passed, and Mayor Jacob Fry did veto it, it was overridden. And it just shows how out of touch the Minneapolis City Council is in relation to the rest of the state. And I think it's a matter of pride for many of them that they're so out of step, because they want to be that shining North Star that's going to be setting the progressive policy for the state, but it's to the detriment of a lot of other places in the state.
Absolutely. And Representative Engen hit on that a little bit about some of the factions that the city council members certainly are trying to keep happy with different policies that they're passing, regardless of whether it's good policy or bad policy. And unfortunately, that's just a really poor way of governing, and we're stuck with it.
Let's go to topic number 2, Walz on abortion.
Yes.
And if I may tee this up, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Governor Tim Walz was on CNN with Caitlin Collins last week. He was on the same day that the Vice President Kamala Harris came to Minnesota. She visited Planned Parenthood in Minnesota, and there was some historical context about her visit. It was described as the first known visit, I should say, by a president or vice president to an abortion clinic. That's been documented in American history.
Wow.
And the Governor Walz was on CNN, and he said, quote, I think speaking to Caitlin Collins about abortion, he said, I think old white men need to learn how to talk about this a little more. And I think the biggest thing is listen to women, listen to what they're saying. We've seen that when we listen to them, they're speaking loudly on this issue, and they're speaking at the ballot box. Your take?
This one I'm actually a little torn on, I will say. I personally, we've discussed this topic many times, and I am pro-choice. While I do, I think that there should be, I'm all about the individual's right to choose. I think that there are a lot of reasons that it needs to be on the table for some folks, and I think that should be. I think there certainly should be limitations to it, and that's my take on it. I do not prescribe to the whole factor of men don't get an opinion on this. No ovaries, no opinion. Doesn't fly with me. I think in a situation, it takes a man and a woman to make a child. And now, regardless of that, I do think that men have a say in this. I don't think that a man should force a woman to carry a child. I don't think a woman should be forced to carry a child if it's unhealthy for her or the child. I think that there are a lot of exceptions. I think that there are a lot of lifestyle scenarios of it not being appropriate for a woman to carry that, or just their choice in the matter. Do I want it to be a widespread, rampant thing that women are having in abortions? No. But I do believe that it is that choice. I just don't believe that men shouldn't have any say, men lawmakers especially, because that is who makes up the majority of our legislative congressional seats is men. I do love, though, this is something, and I think maybe it was on this that I texted you when was it on this one that I said I maybe would even support him? I thought so. So you sent me this and I said, wow, that answer was so good. It even makes me want to potentially support him, because I think it is so important to not that men don't get to have a say in it, but they need to listen to women. You need to listen to why a woman is having an abortion, why a woman at 25 who maybe has a job, why that she made that decision, why a woman at 39 made a decision, why a woman at 15 made that decision. I think I am a firm believer of storytelling needing to be a part of why we legislate and how we legislate. And it needs to be those stories. Those are the things that need to be shared on all sides. I think this is a come to the table and have those kind of conversations. But pregnancy is really difficult. My pregnancy was really tough. I was sick for 6 of the 9 months. I thankfully didn't have any real health concerns until the end. I did have preeclampsia. It's really tough on a lot of people, and to force women to go through that who aren't mentally, physically, financially, emotionally prepared or able to do that is just not gonna get us anywhere, and so listening to women, I think, is the key takeaway to this, is they need to be a part of this, and they need to be driving the conversation, and they need to be driving the lawmaking that is surrounding abortions, and that's my take.
It's a fantastic take, and I agree with you. I just want to say for a moment, I just want to read again. I think old white men need to listen, need to learn how to talk about this a little more. I think the biggest thing is listen to women what they're saying. I mean, I really agreed with what he said, but I really found your reaction to what he said quite interesting. I mean, it just seemed that it seemed to resonate, that kind of listen to women perspective.
Because I think so much on this, it's either night and day, right? We hear so much of the no ovaries, no opinion. And he's not saying that. He's saying he is inviting women into the conversation. And I gotta say, even in 2024, women don't get invited into the conversation a whole lot, heck of a lot. In particular, an issue that is fully about them and their bodies and their future. And like I said, yes, men and their role in that do have a factor there. But having a seat at the table is what women want on all issues, but especially when it comes to abortion.
It's difficult to not, at least from, let me step back for a second. This is a subject that we've discussed quite a bit on this podcast. We had Dr. Scott Jensen on, talked about his campaign and how he messaged on this, and was a big issue in the race for governor. And it's something that we've also talked about. I also think, particularly, it's also something we've talked about in making sure, something that we try to do on this podcast is just to make sure that everyone gets to speak. But one of the things we've tried to do is really have good, thoughtful discussions about how Republicans in particular could be better at in winning over the suburbs and getting more females involved in the political process, particularly not just necessarily having candidates, which would be great, but just having Republicans do a better job with female voters at a bare minimum. It'd be great if there were more female candidates running, but ostensibly what we were talking about is just finding a way to close that gender gap and finding a way for Republicans to do better in the suburbs. I think Walz's message that he said on abortion is pitch perfect. I absolutely think it's pitch perfect. When I saw it as it happened, and I was like, wow, that's a good statement. And I think his ability to say, quote, I think old men need to learn how to talk about this a little more, need to learn how to talk about this some more. And I think the biggest thing is listen to women, listen to what they are saying. Listening to women on this particular issue, let me just say this to you, as a male, I don't think there's any downside to when you're going out and presenting yourself on any issue to talk about how you want to invite people into the conversation. To invite people into the conversation, I don't think is wrong. But on this particular issue, I don't know that I would change a word on what he said. I think it's absolutely pitch perfect.
I literally don't know that I could, in any time working with any candidates or electeds that I work for, write a better answer. He also comes across, and I think because, while I love him and hate him at sometimes, as very earnest and honest in this. I do believe that he is truly wanting to invite women to the table, wanting to listen and learn from women and having them be a part of the conversation a little bit more. And I think even on this, I talked to my pro-life friends, I talked to my pro-choice friends. Obviously, there is a differing of opinions there, but we all need to be having these conversations, and abortion is a hot topic, and it's an uncomfortable conversation to have because it can get so heated, but it is one that we need to come together. We need to figure out a path forward because there is a lot of fear with what's going on in the whole reproductive era realm of things with IVF issues and restrictions being placed on that, restrictions being placed on the morning after pill. I mean, there are so many different things that are concerning. And I have a son right now, but if I had a daughter, I have to say, I don't know how I would sleep at night because it is so scary to think of how many how the walls are kind of caving in on women and being able to choose what their future looks like should they have an unplanned pregnancy.
Correct. I would probably give Walz an A+ on that answer. I
A
mean,
plus.
would you give it A+ too?
Absolutely.
I mean, I knew we were going to be discussing it. I've read it a few times. And as we're discussing it on the air, I can't find one thing that I would change on that answer in terms of, because it really, I mean, it's I mean, I would call it the best answer that particularly, un, respectfully saying it, because he said it, old white men. And wouldn't call myself old, but I'm 50 and I'm certainly white. But my point is that it's on so many levels the answer works. On so many levels the answer works, and it's the reaction to it also is it's puzzling sometimes to see the kind of frustration that people had at the answer, and it did, of course, get some people upset. But I thought it was, without a doubt, one of the best ways for a male politician to answer a question on abortion. And I
Is it?
think go ahead.
Oh, I had a follow up. Is it old white men that are upset at his statement?
Yes, there's no question that the vast majority of people that I've seen are old white men.
I figured.
Yes, and old white men that have since. Yes, I do think that. And I've got to say this, as a medium-aged white man, it's not unreasonable for us to sit a few plays out on some things. We don't have to dominate every conversation. But it's just a good answer. And it's simple, it's crisp, yet it's meaningful,
Mhm.
and it's so good in terms of just, and it's clean, it's precise. It's just and it's on so many levels it works. And I thought your reaction was incredibly interesting, and the discussion points you made on the issue I think is just profound. And I'm proud of how you've answered it. And I think it really gets into a discussion though, Becky, that we've had a lot on different levels, whether it's from the standpoint of Republicans talking about abortion, but just in general. It's also what's also makes it such a good statement is how forward thinking it is, how inviting it is long term, and how much it's a clean answer that really sets him up to move on and talk about other issues. Because there's just, from his standpoint, I mean, look, we've discussed this before. Walz when he was running for Congress at least, was perceived as somewhat of a centrist, a more middle of the road Democrat. He was not endorsed when he first ran for governor. The Senate Majority Leader, Erin Murphy, was endorsed. And so Walz ran in the DFL primary and defeated her in the primary. And so one of the criticisms of Walz was his progressive credentials. And something that we've talked about before is I think the Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, gives him some more bona fides on some of those progressive issues. This answer is a grand slam in terms of his credentials, his progressive credentials, and his long-term vision and thinking on this issue. It clears a path that I think allows him the opportunity to focus on arguably less divisive issues. And since he's kind of cleared the deck on that answer, you see my point?
Mhm. Absolutely. And just to break it down one little thing further, isn't it kind of absurd that a statement that literally says white men talk less, women talk more, white men listen more? That is what is like mind blowing. I mean, that it's just so foreign from our leaders these days. th- it just is funny that it seems when you really break it down and look at it, it's pretty simple, but we don't get it. We don't hear it elsewhere. And so it is, I mean, applaud, bravo, Governor Walz. I don't know that I'm gonna come around and, be endorsing him anytime soon, like
Do you
my
want to ask me,
co-host.
do you want to say something about that?
Yes. So you endorsed Governor Wall.
I did.
Yeah. I haven't broken that out in like months.
You haven't, no. Do you think that do you think in any conceivable way, this could be a statement that a Republican could say?
Yeah. I think, I mean,
Let me
this is
rephrase that. A Republican who wanted to seek statewide office, get endorsed, go through the party process. Do they have the freedom to say that type of statement?
it depends on who to delegates when he or she is seeking the endorsement. No. I don't think that you need to say, I am unequivocally pro-life to get the endorsement, in my mind. I think, though, again, if you look at it, isn't this kind of like Romney's binder full of women? I got all these women around. I'm listening to them. I'm having conversations. I mean, that is what we're supposed to be doing when you're crafting policies and crafting your agenda forward of how you're going to lead the state or city or country. So I would like to think that there is a space on the campaign trail for a Republican to say this, but I think it would be closer to August to November versus May to August.
Yeah. But overall, you would give it a grade plus.
A plus. Before we leave this topic, I do want to hit on a couple of the other comments that he made, because this is certainly going to be something that we continue to talk about as it pertains to the 2024 presidential election. So Walz did not miss his opportunity to ding Trump here. He said, look, the contrast could not be greater. Donald Trump has made it very clear. He brags about a lot of things that are not true. He did not create jobs. He is not a scratch golfer. He is not in super good shape. But he did rip Roe versus Wade out. He did appoint judges who are taking that away, and he will do it again. Again, this is not that I'm a Trump supporter. Let's not talk about jobs in the economy and bashing Republicans on that when we're coming from don't throw stones in a glass house, whatever that saying is. Come
Yep.
on. So we've got some issues there. But it is a good opportunity to ding that. And obviously, this is going to be the line in the sand that is drawn on a national scale and when it comes to abortion. My one question, I am curious on your take on this, though. He doesn't talk about abortion much. This is not something that we have heard much from him over the years. He is someone, obviously an older generation. He is also Catholic. And Walz did kind of give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. He said that those are not mutually exclusive. He said people of deep faith can understand a woman's right to make those choices is important. What's your take on Biden and abortion? Do you think he's ever going to be forced to come out and on the campaign trail and say words, pick a week, whatever it might be? Or do you think he's going to continue to kind of hem and haw around it and maybe let Kamala take that?
It's a great question. First of all, I think the arrival of Kamala Harris to the state of Minnesota and taking on what's been described as such an historic visit to an abortion clinic, I think is significant. I do think, and I'd like to get your take, but I'll answer your question fully, is I do wonder if there is some generational comfort aside from, Biden is, 81, he's Roman Catholic. He's never been one, at least I'm aware of, that he wore the issue of abortion, it's been an out front issue that he's talked about in the same level, certainly, that Governor Walz has. And so I do think in an election cycle where it's going to be a real street fight for every single vote, I think it's going to be impossible for the Biden administration, meaning Joe Biden in particular, to not speak about abortion in clear, precise terms. I think that the statement that Governor Walz has articulated provides the absolute best answer that Joe Biden can have. And it's really a case study in the importance of word choice. The governor's statement, the more and more I talk about here, it is such a good answer that if all Biden would need to do is just to repeat it.
Mhm.
And I think he's going to be in a great position because, as you pointed out, it's inviting women into the conversation. It's that old white men need to learn how to talk about this, a little bit more, and, they need to listen to women. I mean, as you laid out there very eloquently, all of the components of that statement make it such a good answer. Biden just needs to answer it that way and then ensure that he has that message is spread out. And it's a good contrast with what Trump has done on the issue, where I think something that we have talked about extensively, that Republicans are not united on this issue. And so you will have the Democratic Party out there once again coming into the election cycle with leadership talking about it in the clear manner in which the governor of the state did. And Republicans are going to be engaging in some infighting and message contrast on this issue. And that's the advantage, particularly politically speaking, and from a messaging standpoint, I think the Democrats have on abortion versus Donald Trump and the
I
Republicans right now.
completely agree. And last question on this before we move on. Do you think we've talked about it a little bit before about Walz on the national scale, national stage? Obviously, this makes sense that he was reached out to with Kamala coming, the historic event, all of that. But by hitting this out of the park, does it just kind of continues to foster that conversation.
Correct. I mean, aside from, and as you pointed out, aside from the old white men who may be offended by the fact that the relatively middle-aged or old white governor of the state of Minnesota is telling them to sit a few plays out. Aside from their reaction to that, he is not. This is a home run answer, and so I think he has answered this in terms of the eyes of, I think, of progressive Democrats and future generations. This is conceivably the best answer he could have
Mhm.
on this particular issue, coming from relatively old white male. I think it's the best answer that he could have on this issue because, as you know, for all the reasons that you articulated, and I think his ability to come out with a clean, crisp answer that was picked up and supported by so many people, I think is just another kind of uh, advantage point or another kind of check mark that he has in terms of his ability to speak and be seen as a national candidate for national office. It's something that we've talked about before. I absolutely believe, without any hesitation, there is a absolutely reasonable, credible argument to be made that Governor Walz is a national political figure and should be recognized as such on the national stage. It doesn't mean I agree with all of his issues, but his ability to go on CNN and hit and answer the question the way he did, Becky, out of the park as you described, I think is another reason why he is a very well-established, seasoned, and someone that people should keep an eye on as a future potential candidate for national office.
All right, I'm done raving about Governor Walz. That's about all I can handle for the day.
But you did a very fair and balanced job.
I try. I got to give credit where credit is due, and it was due here.
You are, one thing I will say, you are very good about giving credit where credit is due and pointing out when you think somebody screws up. And you're very good about that. So it's
Well, thanks.
great job. And by the way, I think there's going to be an opportunity for you in 2026 if you want to.
I don't know about
We'll see.
that. Let's not get a cart before the horse here.
We'll get our further ours. Okay, good.
Let's move on to the next topic. So we're in BPOU convention season. There are endorsing conventions all across the state. There was one this last weekend in House District 57A, Representative John Kosnick's seat. Spoiler alert. Kosnick won the endorsement. But I do want to give you have some history with his opponent. And I want to give you let's start with you. I'm going to do an interview with you here. First off, if you haven't seen Michael's threads on this, Brodkorb, go find it on Twitter, X. Very substantial amount of stuff out there. But why don't you start with this individual and how you know him and what you've found over the years?
A couple Fridays ago, I was just talking to someone randomly, discussing kind of the events of the week, and they brought up that Representative John Kosnick, who's been a guest of this show, and is just a great Republican guest of the show and someone that we've met over the years, but he was a guest of the show. He was being challenged for the endorsement by a gentleman by the name of Rick Stidger. And I was just stopped in my tracks when I heard the name. The person who told me this was unaware that Mr. Stidger and I had any type of past. Let me explain a bit what that past is. We've talked about before. I wrote a book called The Girls Are Gone, about the disappearance of two girls from Lakeville, two sisters from Lakeville, who disappeared during a custody dispute. They were abducted by their mother, and there was a group of this kind of cadre of these adults who kind of were involved in the conspiracy involving the disappearance of these girls. Some of those people were criminally culpable and were charged, but there were other people kind of on the edges of that were supporters, allies of some of the people who were either criminally charged, named as persons of interest, or just friends and associates. And that's someone who I would classify as Rick Stidger. One night when I was doing some reporting for the Star Tribune on this case, I received a text message from someone. I thought it was a gag, and it was someone kind of criticizing me for my reporting on this case. And I called the person on the phone because I thought it was one of my friends. And Rick Stidger was on the other end of the phone, and he was very threatening on the phone. Made statements that he knew where I lived, needed to sleep with one eye open, that he knew people in motorcycle gang and stuff, and it was very threatening and concerning. It was the start of a lot of the threats that I endured over the course of reporting at the Star Tribune on this case, but also writing a book and doing some original reporting on this case. The girls were found in part because of the work that I and another reporter at the Star Tribune had contributed to. They were found by law enforcement in just an amazing way. Girls that were found alive, their life is moving forward. Everything's going great. Rick Stidger decides he's going to run for office. The same Rick Stidger who called, who I spoke to on the phone, who sent me a threatening text, who I spoke to on the phone, and he threatened me on the phone. The same Rick Stidger who testified on behalf of one of the criminals in the case. This chucklehead decided to run for the state legislature, and I was dumbfounded by this. I then proceeded to look up some additional material on Rick Stidger, and this guy has a very rough past. Let me say from the onset, I am someone who believes in, you can listen to past interviews, I'm someone who believes in second, third, and fourth chances. I'm here because of the grace and goodwill that people have in giving me second, third, and fourth chances. And so I'm a huge believer in that. Here's kind of my rules for how people can overcome their past. Number one, you're honest about it. Number two, you learn from those mistakes and you truly commit yourself to having a changed past based on everything that I've seen in the court file. Rick Stidger is without a doubt, I do not believe without any hesitation, he is not a changed person, and he is the same hooligan and thug who threatened me on the phone the night that he did when we spoke. I want to be clear to the listeners here. What was the intent of his threat that night in 2015? The intention of his threat was for me to stop my work. And let's talk about what I was reporting. I was reporting on the disappearance of two missing sisters from Lakeville, Minnesota, the exact community that this chucklehead wants to represent in the legislature. His intention was to intimidate and browbeat a reporter, a journalist, someone who was working on this case, to stop them from reporting on this because he may have known someone and did know someone who was convicted for their role in the disappearance of his kids. That's the character of this person. So you can set aside everything else that exists in the court file. My personal frustration and anger at this individual running is that this is someone who wanted to intimidate me, threaten me, in the course, threaten me, threaten my family, and to stop me from reporting on this case. Reporting and investigative work that led to two missing sisters being found alive, reunited with their family, and them now having an incredibly productive and healthy life. That's what Rick Stidger decided to stop. That's what he tried to prevent me from. That's what the future that he tried to stop from happening. That's who he was attempting to bully. That's who he was attempting to threaten. And it's just monstrous that this individual thinks that I'm going to sit quiet idly by as he runs for the legislature and not speak up about it. So in the course of finding out about it, I put some, base information that I had known, a couple pages from my book I had put out and some other information. But then I went to the courthouse and found some other additional information out. And every belief that I had about Rich Stidger, just from the interaction I had with him in terms of when he texted me, we spoke on the phone, and I later saw him in court, it was validated because he is exactly the type of thug, a bully, and type of person who I absolutely believed he is. And the court record, and I would encourage the public to review the court record on Mr. Stidger, is quite extensive. And it shows, in my eyes, without any mistaken clarity, someone who has both a problem with threats, violence, intimidation. This is someone who has been loose with a firearm. This is someone who's had both driven drunk and decided to drive drunk with a loaded firearm in his possession. This is someone who went to a liquor store and left a handgun in the restroom. This is someone who is just a careless, reckless individual. And I just have to say in response to that one more thing I want to add. So Representative Kosnick was endorsed almost 2 weeks ago. He was endorsed on a Saturday. And then a week later, he was endorsed. There was some dust up about the original call for the conventions. Representative John Kosnick is a piece of Minnesota political history because he's been endorsed twice in 1 year for the same legislative district, and he was endorsed both times for the same seat. On Saturday, this past Saturday, Rich Stidger showed up at the convention and discussed and openly campaigned against a Representative Kosnick. John Kosnick was endorsed again. Let's talk about the district for a second. Rick Stidger's candidacy poses problems wherever he's running, but particularly in a suburban district that he was attempting to be endorsed in. We've talked before about the importance of Republicans doing well in the suburbs. Rick Stidger as an endorsed Republican candidate not only hurts the ability for Republicans to be successful in that legislative district, he's the exact type of person that could impact a congressional district race and statewide race. He's the exact type of person that becomes kind of a punching bag for and gets connected to Republican candidates all across the state. That's how bad his resume is. That's how bad his background is. And that's how much of a problem he is for his candidacy. I will say to you that even since the endorsing convention last Saturday, I found out more information about Rich Stidger, which even is more concerning to me. The Republicans in this state, particularly those who supported his candidacy, have to start looking in the mirror and understanding that Republicans cannot risk in any district elevating someone who has such a questionable background as Rick Stidger does. I try to be very responsible with my words and choose them very precisely. I am very confident in saying to you that Rick Stidger is, in my opinion, a very bad person. I have had a number of experiences with him. None of them have been enjoyable. None of them have been what I consider to be quality or anything. I do not see whatsoever. I'm going to use this word very specifically. Any redeeming qualities in Rick Stidger that would warrant or could even entertain a discussion into him being a member of the legislature. I'm at a complete loss to see how anyone sees anything else other than a complete and absolute thug, which is what he is. And I'm glad he was not endorsed. I hope he never seeks elective office again. And I cannot begin to tell you how disappointed I am that there were elements of the Republican Party that believe that Rick Stidger was anything about his candidacy should be embraced or welcomed or celebrated. He is an absolute bully. He was a bully to me, and the court record on Mr. Stidger is voluminous in supporting my statement that he is someone who has a well-documented record of violence, threats, and sheer bullying. And I hope he simply goes away.
Now, I'm curious, was he asked in any debate or forum or at the convention about any of this? Did he have a response for any of this, or was he just hoping that it stayed hidden?
No, Rick Stidger was not, I'm aware, was not specifically asked about anything related to me. He did, and members of his family proceeded to discuss spoke about some issues related to his past in an attempt to whitewash and in many ways just gaslight the public. I'd like to share one story, if I may.
You bet.
Rich Stidger had a DWI in 2020. According to multiple sources, Mr. Stidger spoke at the convention and addressed his DWI. He discussed the circumstance of his DWI in this way. He said that on the night he was stopped for drinking, it was his birthday of his deceased son. He had been drinking extensively that night, and had gone to a nearby Walmart around a mile away from his house to pick up a cake that he was going to have, a birthday cake to kind of just honor his late son. It was a very emotionally charged and in some ways a very convincing speech that many heard that day. And he was stopped. He admitted he'd been drinking. He told the crowd, but he had been stopped roughly a mile from his house, coming from that Walmart to get that cake because it was, his deceased son's birthday. And there was some mitigating factors that involved circumstances involving his DWI that night. None of that is true. Rich Stidger was not stopped on the night of his deceased son's birthday. He was not stopped coming to or from a Walmart. There's not a Walmart a mile away from his house. There was no cake involved. The truth of the matter is Rich Stidger was stopped after leaving a bar in Elko. He, according to police records and law enforcement records and other court documents, he had been drinking that night at a bar. He had been verbally assertive with staff and other patrons of this establishment. There was a female bartender who was concerned about working late and closing with Mr. Stidger in the bar. She asked patrons before they left to contact police because he was not leaving. Mr. Stidger then left, not before there was a disagreement about whether he had paid his bill or not. He then left the bar and was stopped. He was swerving on the road. He was pulled over. Mr. Stidger was 0.19, according to the police reports, when they took his blood alcohol level. But most disturbingly, he had a loaded firearm in his waistband. He was well over both the legal, he was twice the legal limit that you can legally drive and past the legal limit that you can consume alcohol in this state and legally carry a firearm. Mr. Stidger was arrested and was charged and pleaded guilty to this crime. And that's none of the circumstances that he described. And there are other stories like this. I will say to you that he perpetuated an absolute con on the Republicans in that district. And there are a number of people who left that convention who contacted me about some of these stories that were told. And I made sure to correct the record on the truth of Mr. Stidger's record. I will say again, there were a number of Republicans who I think were supportive of his campaign, particularly Action for Liberty. They have developed a real track record in this state of finding unqualified and particularly angry men to support and endorse as candidates. And it's a subject that we should talk about more down the road because I think there's more of a narrative that we can discuss on this. But Mr. Stidger is not, he may meet the legal qualifications to run for the office. He is not qualified in any way to serve an elected office. And any fair examination of his record by anyone with an IQ above a ham sandwich would understand that.
Notice you chose a ham sandwich, not a turkey
Correct.
sandwich.
Correct.
Got it. I don't have anything
Because
really
I
to add.
consider the ham sandwich to be dumber than a turkey sandwich.
Damn it. Dang it. Got me there. Okay. Good one. I don't have a ton to add on here. I've watched very closely to your Twitter threads on this. I'm always just blown away when individuals with a track record and a background and just who they are like this go through the process and are somehow, I mean, I guess it is because there are times when it doesn't come out and it doesn't come up and it gets to be, they can skate in through that. But this is why we need to do our due diligence. We need to get good, solid people. This just hurts the whole party brand. This is it these are just unacceptable completely. It's just really frustrating when this goes through. I am so glad that Representative Kosnick was re-endorsed, is on the path to hopefully serving another term for that district. He is a great man. He is a great legislator. We're happy to have him and appreciate you sharing your story and all the information that you found so easily about this man's troubling past.
Correct. It's the information's out there, the internet's on the computer, and I have encouraged multiple people just to examine the record. And after people examine the record and have conversations with me, not one person has left the conversation and said, "Yeah, that's someone that should serve in the legislature." It's important that voters kick the tires on whether their candidates seeking the endorsement part of the process. But there's a longer conversation I think we should have at some point about the endorsement process, how candidates are being selected, and the checks and the kind of the kicks of the tires that people are doing on these candidates.
Absolutely. In for that for sure. Let's go national. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So we are going to get into, I guess, now the infamous Trump bloodbath comments. So Trump was at a rally with Senate candidate Bernie Moreno in Ohio this past weekend. And there he said, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the whole country. That will be the least of it, but they're not going to sell those cars. They're building massive factories. Now, do we start there? Or do we need to throw in what he said before that?
Dealer's choice. You go through. What do you think is the best way?
Let me do the one before it, and then we can
Okay.
break down how I'm curious your thought if it matters, if this matters, or if it does not. So those words followed a rant that the president, a former president Donald Trump, made against the president or to the president of China, who is supposedly his friend, but who knows? He was speaking to the president of China, said, "If you are listening, you and I are friends, but I understand." But he understands the way I deal. Those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, you're going to not hire Americans. You're going to sell the cars to us. No, we're going to put 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars if I get elected. Now, First, before we get into this, I just got to say, I'm reading this word for word. So it's not me fumbling over the words. This is just how the former president speaks. So let that be there. But I'm curious your take. So when you read when you understand, yes, he was talking about the car industry and automakers and what China is doing with these factories in Mexico, and then goes into it's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That will be the least of it, but you're not selling those cars. They're building massive factories. What's your take on Trump said there's going to be a bloodbath? Is the context needed? Is it a step too far? A mix of the both? What's your take?
I would say this, and working in opposition research, context always matters. And I think that there are a number of statements that the former president has said that are concerning. The number of statements that the former president has said that are concerning. And so, do I think that this is the cleanest hit on Donald Trump? I don't. I don't think this is the cleanest hit on Trump. That being said, I think that he is incredibly imprecise with his language sometimes. I think that he's imprecise sometimes with his words. I also think that he chooses his words very carefully sometimes. It's a combination of both. And I do think that there is a documented track record in Donald Trump's rhetoric of including this incendiary language that is meant to energize his supporters. Election conspiracies. This is someone who, to this day, does not believe he lost the 2020 election. That is going to be discussed. I have long said and long believed that fear is one of the best factors to drive people to the poll. It's the strongest emotion to drive people to the poll, being fearful of something, that something is going to happen. And Donald Trump knows that very well. And so he is going to continue to use this type of incendiary rhetoric. Now, again, to be fair, and as I can be, I think the bloodbath comment is not the cleanest hit on Donald Trump. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not as if the bloodbath statement is really out of context in terms of who he is overall as a candidate. Would I feel comfortable referencing the bloodbath the way some of the media did? No, I wouldn't. Not the way all members of the media did. Some outlets, I think, gave it the proper context. That being said, there's so much out there to hit Donald Trump on in terms of his statements. Again, I'm not trying to be inconsistent here. He is someone who can be incredibly imprecise with his language, but then can also absolutely know what buttons to push. And verbally, the question that I think there's a struggle sometimes with the media as to which is it. Is he just being flamboyant with his rhetoric, or is he really being serious? And that's the danger here. And so I think that this type of rhetoric is only going to continue because this is what he is. He's going to talk about this way. I think this is going to be a nasty election, particularly when it comes to matters of election integrity, whether the election is going to be held truthfully, whether it's going to be accurate, whether it's honesty. And I think the best tool that Donald Trump has, unfortunately, and I want to qualify and say this unfortunately, is fear. I think he's going to tell his supporters that this election is going to be stolen. He's going to lie as best he can and create a climate of fear and also distrust about this election. And so in that way, I don't think it's wrong to overall characterize his rhetoric as being incendiary and unhelpful and unproductive.
I
Your
agree.
take.
I think how you said where he sometimes doesn't think, but sometimes thinks too much. I mean, he's fundraising the hell out of this, right? So
Yes.
he knows that he can say these things and then point it back to the MAGA crew, his supporters, and reap the benefits of it. This was pretty bumpy, like you said. I don't think it is a very clean hit. The one thing that was concerning, though, was after this comment, later in that speech at the same rally in Ohio, he went on to say, if the election isn't won, I'm not sure you'll ever have another election in this country. That does kind of stoke those flames of an actual bloodbath, World War III, a civil war, whatever it might be. He's certainly poking the bear there. He is waiting for Democrats to jump on that. I do want to also, you mentioned some of his past examples of funny you mentioned that. One of the articles I read had a list, so I pulled that together. Obviously, January 6th is the biggest thing we can point to with his words having action, whether it was what he actually meant, the intent. As far as I understand the law, intent really doesn't matter. It's what actually happens, right? January 6th, he was told his supporters that he would pay their legal expenses if they attacked a protester at one of his rallies. He said in September that shoplifters should be shot and that Mark Milley, a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, should be executed. He urged his supporters to go after the Attorney General of New York. After the Ohio rally, he even said that migrants were poisoning the blood of the country. I mean, he goes big and he certainly does it with reason. I think it's super dangerous, super inappropriate, and does have some concerns of what actually is going to happen because there are so many people, like we've talked about in this MAGA group, in the far Trump world, that take these things from heart. I mean, you see it. If you can watch any of the drama shows that are on ABC, NBC, whatever. They're so often a storyline of somebody who is mentally unstable, who hears something from a leader in some capacity, elected, education, what doctor, leader, they hear something and they act on that. And it is really concerning that we're getting there. I think personally that candidates and elected should hold themselves to a higher standard and be careful with their words. Words do have meaning, again, regardless of intent. And so that's super concerning. I want to hit lastly on this. I do want to share the post that he put on, what's it called? Truth Social.
True Social, yes.
He wrote, "The fake news media and their Democrat partners in the destruction of our nation pretended to be shocked at my use of the word bloodbath, even though they fully understood what I was simply referring to imports allowed by Kirk and Joe Biden, which are killing the automobile industry." See, I mean, that's actually kind of a decent statement. I don't hate that, but he knows what he's doing. I think more
Absolutely.
often than not, he is going forward. How can I make news out of this rally today? That's
Yes,
what he's
and when
doing.
he
And he
yes,
knows they're gonna get covered. And
correct,
he dominated. It was Trump in the news cycle, and anybody that supports him or is on that side saw that, heard it, and said, "Hell yeah, president."
that's right, exactly, and he comes out ahead. I mean, this does nothing to hurt his base, it does nothing to hurt his support, and he comes out ahead, as you very well articulated. He comes out ahead because the media attacks him, and, he gets to play the fake media, the institutions. I mean, it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy, and again, while I think we're both on the same page that it wasn't the cleanest hit on him, it was certainly the type of content that wouldn't surprise us if he meant, because he said somewhat of the same things. And this is someone who is throwing out a lot of incendiary rhetoric on a very regular basis. And I don't have any concern at all about saying that this is the type of rhetoric that's going to continue in this race. That's what he does. He's going to create fear. This is going to be a fear election. And the best way to motivate Donald Trump supporters, unfortunately, is to lie and claim that the election isn't going to have merit. And I think that we're coming into potentially the ugliest election cycle that we've ever had. And I think that it's important to just remember that, we're going to try to be a good place to talk about subjects in a very responsible way. But I think in this particular instance, I think it's fair to say we both kind of agree that wasn't the cleanest hit on the president, the former president, but he does have a track record for saying this type of stuff, correct?
Correct. And
Got it.
because I like to balance out when I'm too nice to someone like Governor Tim Walz, I do have to call out. It was a little disappointing. Governor Tim Walz did retweet a story and said, "No, there will not be. Whoever loses the election will call and congratulate the winner. We'll work together to build a more perfect union like patriots who love our democracy." Now, his message there, sure, nice, cute, fun. But he was kind of jumping on the bandwagon of Trump saying this. I know Representative Harry Niska was one that called him out. A couple of the other members of the legislature didn't love that he did that. I don't think he needed to do that. I don't think he needed to step in there at all, especially because it was, uh, to be perfectly honest, I feel like it was a staffer who saw this and decided to jump on. I don't, and took advantage of that situation. And I don't think it was a right step. Speaking of the law, we have a segment that is today that is a surprise to me. I have no idea what is coming here, but I was requested to add a topic to the script titled, "Did Michael break the law?" Please explain.
See, are you ready for this?
I hope I am. I have no idea.
Okay. Now, I really hope I don't disappoint you. I really hope I don't disappoint you. Not on whether I broke the law, because I'm somewhat confident that I didn't, but particularly what this subject is about. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is for the following reason. So I told the person that I spoke that brought this subject up to me that I was so confident in my standing that I wasn't breaking the law, that I would ask my podcast host if we could discuss it on the show. So this is a leap of faith on my part, because I have been told that I am not on strong legal ground. And I'll explain the backstory right now. I spoke to a very prominent Minnesota attorney this week talking about Star Wars, talking about Star Wars. And I was explaining to this prominent Minnesota attorney about my love of Star Wars, and in particular, my love of some Star Wars films called the Despecialized Edition of Star Wars. Now, Becky, let me start off for a question. I don't think we've delved into this level of nerdity before. I'd like to say, are you a Star Wars or Star Trek person?
I'm gonna have to go with neither, Bob. No.
Okay, neither. Have you seen Star Wars?
Yes, I've seen like one or two back when I was like in my teens.
One or two. There's more than one or two.
Correct.
You've seen one or two of the movies?
Correct.
Okay, great. We got great content. We don't have to worry about this. Is the rest of the season. This is the rest of the year. We're just going to do, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do one episode. We're going to do one chapter of one episode. We got the rest of the 6 months planned. So don't
Okay.
worry about this. So this is what happened. So I'm talking to this lawyer. Again, it's fair to say a prominent Minnesota attorney. I was discussing with him, and now I should say, this prominent Minnesota attorney does not represent me in any capacity, so fully able to discuss this. But I was sharing this story about Star Wars, and we were talking in particular. I think the conversation started because there's Star Wars movie on Disney. There's Star Wars movies are on Disney Plus. I of course refuse to watch them, which you'll hear about. The reason I refuse to watch them is because of the fact that the movies that you see on TV, the Star Wars movies that you see on TV, are not the ones that appeared when they were originally released. Let me explain. Okay. Star Wars was released in 1977. Empire Strike Back was released in 1980, and Return of the Jedi was released in 1983. Those movies came out in their original form in their original release. The movies that appeared that were later distributed on DVD and Blu-ray were not high definition versions of the movies that appeared as they were originally released. Star Wars was re-released in 1997, along with Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. They were released as specialized editions. What George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, did is he added new elements to those movies. He changed some things regarding those movies, and he added new elements in. They are referred to as these specialized editions of those movies. They are not the movies as they originally appeared when they were released in 1977, 1980, and 1983. They're edited versions.
And that
One,
upsets you.
in unbelievable ways. I can barely
Disgust.
I can barely contain myself how much it frustrates me. First of all, let me put in context how much it also frustrates the United States Congress. In 1977, when Star Wars released, it won a number of number of awards. 1989, the Library of Congress established a process by which certain films would be kind of brought into the Library of Congress National Archives. In 1989, 25 films were selected to be preserved because of their value to America and our country. Star Wars was one of those films that was asked to be archived. Congress requested from George Lucas a digital print of the movie Star Wars as it was originally released. To this date, George Lucas has not complied with the request of Congress to provide a digital copy. What he did in 1997 is he provided a copy of the specialized edition of Star Wars, which is an abomination. Did not provide the original copy. So to this date, George Lucas has not provided a copy of the original Star Wars so it could be digitally preserved. So here's what happened. A group of people decided, Star Wars fans, normal people just like me, decided what they were
Normal.
going to,
We're gonna
normal
put
people
quotes
just
around
like me
normal.
were going to do is what they're going to do is they decided to despecialize the Star Wars movies. There are a number of despecialized Star Wars movies. And so In 2010, I think it started in 2010, a gentleman, this is called Harmy's Despecialized Edition, okay? This person from Czechoslovakia decided to despecialize the Star Wars films. And so here's the caveat. This is where the discussion went sideways. What they did is they took the Star Wars movies in terms they used, at that point, I think the first one that was used was kind of a Blu-ray edition. But basically what they did is they produced using the existing films that are out there that have been produced and have been sold. They despecialized them to release them in a way in which they're high definition videos. What that means is this, is that now just this is where we get into legal territory. Okay.
Right.
Now, interest of full disclosure, you did attend law school for a year and you've been designated as the legal advisor
Right.
of the Breakdown and Brodkorb and Becky.
Sure.
So this is where the conversation gets crossway. So I own, just so we set the table here, I own VHS copies of the original Star Wars films. I own VHS copies of the special edition Star Wars films. I own Blu-rays of all the films. I own DVDs of the special editions. I also own the bonus discs of the original movies, but they're not of digital quality. What they are copies of Laserdisc versions of the movies. And if you own all of those, the composite of all of those things, it is legally permissible, I believe, without any question whatsoever, to download and have a copy of this fan Star Wars film. And all it is this, it is a high resolution digital version of Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. I have been in possession of a despecialized edition of Star Wars since they first came out. In fact, my father, God rest his soul, who was a CPA, not a lawyer, he and I sat down and discussed whether it was legally permissible for me to own these films and have these. My father was of the opinion it was absolutely clear because I own basically all of the underlying films. And so no one is buying these films. They're not selling them on our line. These are just fan films. And so I was explaining this story. I got on a real tangent this week with a lawyer, and he told me without any hesitation I was breaking the law. And I said, no, I'm not breaking the law. I'm so confident that I'm not breaking the law. I'm going to discuss it on my podcast. Now, I have a couple quick facts to point out to you. Number one, technically speaking, I don't think we're in a gray area. I feel very confident in my legal standing because I would not be openly discussing it on the podcast. But here's the issue. The issue is that the videos aren't being sold. I have these 3 copies and I've gotten there's new editions that are constantly being worked. This is an evolving process. There's a lot of people that are working on this. Good people. I've not paid for these films. I have not sold them. I do not transfer them. I do not give them away. I do not sell them in any way. I don't try to profit in any way from them. These are fan films, high quality HD versions of just masterpieces. I think I'm on completely solid legal ground. I will also say the following. There's been no one charged related to this at all. There's been no concerns expressed, no cease and desist letters sent. There's nothing that Disney, George Lucas, or any of the studios have ever done to try to stop this process. In fact, there's been a lot of comments made that these are just fans who appreciate the film and just want to watch them in the original beauty in which they came out. That's all that's going on. And this is, again, not to defame lawyers or criticize them, but this is how lawyers just screw up fun. Again, if lawyers ran the world, there would be no playgrounds and there would be no ladders. And so this lawyer inserted himself into this discussion this week, trying to give a legal opinion that no one asked him to give. And he made it very clear that he thought that I was unequivocally, without any hesitation, in violation of the law, which he did not know at the time. One additional thing I'll add. Over the course of my life, I have come in contact with multiple agents of law enforcement, particularly FBI agents, and I've asked them about the ownership of these films. They've looked me dead in the eye and said, yeah, this isn't a real priority for the FBI or law enforcement. So I feel very confident. And the reason why I'm going through this exercise, Becky, because as you know, knock on wood, I've gone through, I've made some mistakes in life, and through the grace of God go thee, but I've benefited from second, third, and fourth chances. This is without a doubt the only dangerous or questionable thing that I've done in quite some time. I lead a very boring life. Okay. And yes, if you're listening, Disney, George Lucas, yes. Michael Brodkorb in Eagan, Minnesota has despecialized edition of Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars, and Return of the Jedi that he enjoys on a regular basis. And we'll watch them tonight in some capacity as he's editing this podcast. That's the story. So my question to you, Becky, is did I break the law?
I mean, my initial take is yes.
What? Your initial take is I broke the law?
Because I feel like your argument is just
I'm sorry. I'm flabbergasted. You think so
I
let's
will
be clear
explain.
here. You not only do you think I broke the law, you believe I'm currently breaking the law?
Yes. First of all, let's talk about FBI saying you're not. It's not a big priority. Does not comment at all towards legality of this issue.
Wow.
Your basic response or argument in this situation is that you're such a big fan and nerd and spent so much time and money on this stuff that you should be able to get a couple of them for free.
I don't have anything free.
How did you
Own
said you didn't you said you didn't pay for this
but
despecialized?
I own but the despecialized edition are made up of all of these films. What they've pieced together. Maybe I didn't explain that well enough. This may change your answer whether I've broken the law. All of what's now considered kind of these despecialized editions in some way is a final version of Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi
Yeah.
that were built off of all of the versions of the film that I own.
That you have. Correct. But let me
So
say
I
that.
own all of I have spent more, second only to Vikings tickets and potential solutions for hair loss. I cannot think of anyone else I've spent more money on than on Star Wars stuff. I'm embarrassed to discuss how much I've spent on Star Wars junk.
Here is some of the reasoning in my mind of why it seems questionable at best.
Do you
First,
understand though that I own all the films, that there's no
sure.
new product here?
Well, let's say I have Clueless on VHS and then I have Clueless on DVD and I don't have it on Blu-ray, but I find a place where I can download it for free to put it on a Blu-ray disc myself, but I already own it. Is that not you're still pirating that film?
How am I pirating? I own it.
You had to get it from somewhere.
Okay.
You didn't despecialize it. I also go
I
back
didn't
like
I
the
didn't pay to do
Napster era.
I didn't
Well,
pay to
this
do
is
specialize it.
right. But this goes back to college life where I may or may not have illegally pirated, Napster and LimeWire and all of that, downloaded all of this stuff. It's still illegal. It's still free. I didn't pay for it. I didn't have any part in the distribution of it. I will say I looked up in this, the little thing that flashes up at the beginning of a movie, the FBI warnings. It does that leans a little bit more your way. It says the unauthorized reproduction or distribution of this copyright work is illegal. It does not say the reception. Somebody receiving this pirated stuff is illegal.
Okay.
So that's my only argument on your side. I gotta say, I understand that you put a lot of time and work into this, but doesn't it? I guess I don't know, man. I'm really
You
impressed with your. I gotta ask though, do you next to all of these films have action figures too?
come on, I'm an adult. I mean, come on now, let's be realistic here.
Okay, I just had to ask.
I have let me start over. I have some action figures and I have some uh
Started with absolutely not. Okay,
I have some helmets, some things that I have. That being said, I just think here's what I'm going to say to you.
you're a
I think
purist here. You want to see it in its purest form.
yes, I want to see it in its original form as Congress wanted it to be. Here's the thing I would
Are
say to
you
you.
going to hand that to Congress?
No, I'm not a mandated reporter, and so I'm not going to just turn it over to Congress. But what I want to just say to you is that to this date, there has been no ability until thankfully the work of this vast community that's not suffered under the legal tyranny that you're asking for. They
So
have not suffered.
it doesn't exist out there. This is something you could not have gotten if without this avenue of this
Correct. And
person.
I went through
That's fair. Okay.
I
Okay.
went
I'm
through an
back on your side.
extensive amount of deliberation as to whether this, and I did a checklist and I made an inventory of the things. Now,
So you
a couple
couldn't
things.
just go purchase if you wanted, even if you
Could
wanted.
not purchase it in any way. I don't
Okay.
think there's
I'm
any
back on your side.
conceivable
I'm on your side.
yeah, I don't think there's any conceivable way that you can purchase this stuff. And again, I guarantee you there are people out there that don't have the extensive catalog of the Star Wars films that I do that can justify in some way that the fact that they own these. I mean, I will say a couple things. I hope I'm not going to put myself on a. If there's someone that's going to be charged with this, God Almighty, I hope it's not me. Okay, because if I've just blown up the entire now the person behind this, he's done interviews, he's legitimate, he's done a lot of things, great work. These are beautiful films, and I don't sell them, I don't just dispense it, I don't do anything to try to in any way monetize my passion and love for this. I will say one last thing is that at the worst, I think at the best, I think, and it's fair to say, is that this is a group of people who want to watch Star Wars in the way in which it should be watched and not through some of the edits and additions that have been done. And Congress feels the same way because they would like this to be preserved. And I will just say in closing on this subject, when has Congress ever been wrong? And so I'm on the side of, I think, America and Congress.
That is quite the way to end. I appreciate that story. That was fantastic.
Did you think that was? Did you have any? I mean,
I had
because
no idea.
I'm coming in hot with based on my track record. Did Michael break the law? It could have been a whole variety of subjects.
Yeah, I did not expect Star Wars. It wasn't in my top 30.
Okay. Now, just to be clear, I want to just make sure the record is clear on this. Do you think I broke the law?
I have reconsidered my initial stance, and I do not think so.
Okay, good. Good. Because if the FBI is tipped off, it's going to be, just don't make any calls after this episode's over, okay?
All here.
All right.
Thanks
Becky,
for a
thank
good
you.
one.
Thanks for a good one. And
My
by the
new
way,
favorite segment.
yes, and I think we might have to come back and talk about some of this Napster activity in college. I
No,
think we should do a segment called "Did Becky Break the Law?"
the answer there
Okay.
is yes.
Okay, yes.
Many
All
times
right.
over. We're not, my college career, we're not getting into that.
All right. Thank you so much again.
Bye.
Bye. We want to thank you for listening to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. And before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on the platform where you listen. You can leave a review or give us a shout out on our website or across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return next week. Thank you again for listening.